When it comes to political analysis here in South Carolina, College of Charleston professor Gibbs Knotts is your guide. And in this special edition of Quintin's Close-Ups, I sit down with him one-on-one. Professor Knotts,
Yes.
It's so good to see you.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for getting in touch with me.
Anytime, on
Yeah.
such a short notice.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Let me begin with some breaking news
Sure.
out of the political world.
Yeah.
As you know, State Representative and Walter Scott family lawyer Justin Bamberg
Right.
has announced that he was actually going to switch from the Clinton campaign to the Sanders campaign.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
Okay, I hadn't even heard that, but very interesting, yes.
And I'm wondering, when you hear that, what goes through your mind?
Well, I mean, I've been one who's been saying that I think Clinton has a big advantage in South Carolina. She's struggling some in Iowa and New Hampshire right now, but the Clintons, Bill before her, and then Hillary have always done pretty well in the African-American community. I mean, dating back to their time in Arkansas and their time in the White House during the 90s, and so that was a huge advantage for Hillary Clinton. She didn't do as well in 2008 because she was running against Barack Obama, who was running a historic campaign, but even so, she won about 20% of the Democratic electorate. So for Sanders to have any chance in South Carolina, and really any chance nationally, he's going to have to do well amongst African Americans. And so I don't know that this one endorsement is going to be the thing that puts Sanders over the edge, but it's definitely an encouraging sign for Sanders. And I'll be interested to see if other leaders in the African American community follow suit and also shift from Clinton to Sanders.
Because she has that firewall.
She does. I mean, I think of South Carolina as the firewall. I mean, South Carolina, I think there's 1 or 2% of the population in Iowa and New Hampshire are African American. I mean, it's not a very racially. Those are neither very racially diverse places. South Carolina, of course, about 30% of the overall state population is African American, and maybe close to 60% of voters in the Democratic primary are going to be African American. And so you really can't win in South Carolina from the presidential standpoint on the Democratic side without doing well in the African American community.
And let's move from the presidential elections to the State of the City address, which will be the first for Mayor John Tecklenburg.
Right.
And I believe he told Channel 4 this, he will be focused primarily on the West Ashley revitalization quality and also life issues in Charleston.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, when you hear about West Ashley revitalization, if I can get that and the quality of life, what does that tell you?
Well, I mean, he ran on that. He ran on, hey, we're in all these national publications for the best place to visit, and I don't want to change that, but I want to also make it one of the best places to live. And of course, quality of life issues, particularly traffic and the ability to get around without taking all day, are really, really important. And of course, I think he's reacting to Mayor Riley. I mean, most of the candidates, maybe William Dudley Gregory was the exception, but most of the candidates aligned themselves and said very positive things about Mayor Riley. With that said, I think there's some folks that feel like Riley didn't spend as much time focused on James Island and West Ashley and focused a lot of his attention downtown and making downtown this world-class city that many think that it's become. And so I think it's probably time to look at West Ashley a little bit. It's an area that has serious traffic problems right now and hasn't necessarily been, revitalization efforts haven't really focused on West Ashley. And so I think that's an encouraging sign. We'll say, I think Riley did in his last State of the State address, talked a lot about West Ashley as well, but Riley was focused a lot on getting the Gilliard Center finished, the African American Museum. I mean, his record on design and development really are unbelievable, but I think that you can't focus on everything, and focusing on some of these other areas of Charleston which actually have more people living outside of the peninsula than on the peninsula, I think makes sense for Tecklenburg, and I think it's a good thing for our region overall.
And talk to me about Mayor Riley's legacy. What is that in your mind?
I think for sure, I mean, just longevity, leadership during crises. I think, he started out, one of the things, he was talking about the Confederate flag way before Governor Haley gave her address and the flag came down here in 2015. And so I think he's, been focused on ways to bring South Carolinians together and reaching across racial groups and across economic groups. He's definitely put a lot of effort into that and had some successes. I mean, I think, infrastructure, flooding, things like that, maybe didn't get as much attention.
Okay.
And I think that I wouldn't be surprised if Tecklenburg focuses some on those things. Are sometimes less exciting and less flashy.
Right.
But if you've been stuck downtown in a big flood, that's a pretty big issue for you.
It really is. Let's move from Charleston to Columbia because,
Sure.
as you know, last week Governor Haley held her State of the State
Right,
address,
right.
and she talked about domestic violence, Murray Emanuel, Walter Scott, and a little bit about education. And some people, most of the politicians, believe that she didn't spend enough time on really roads.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so this is sort of a new post. I sort of call the post Emmanuel Nikki Haley. I mean, she's shown a tremendous amount of empathy.
Right.
She's talked about issues and talked about race and her own race and discrimination she's faced in ways that she never did before summer of 2015. And she definitely seems like she's got some policy things that she wants to get past. I mean, I think Haley's done really well in terms of leading the state through some challenging times, whether it's the flood, the Walter Scott shooting, or the Emanuel shooting. But she's never had a big record of legislative accomplishments that she can point to. She's been at odds with the State House and State Senate in many ways, and it's kind of strange because they're all Republicans. They're controlled by Republicans. There's some Democrats there, obviously, and so I think roads are something that there's a lot of the public, probably the majority of public, thinks that something needs to be done with the roads, but she's very anti new tax, and so she says, well, I'll raise the gas tax, but there needs to be some income tax amounts that come down as well. And so, but of course those income taxes pay for so many of the things the state does, and so figuring out if there's some room for compromise, that's it could just be that she feels like she can make more headway in some of these other areas, and the roads issue, there's gonna could be, I mean, it's a big issue, but whether she can get that done and get that through the legislature is a real question for this term.
And let's talk more about Nikki Haley and her remaining years in South Carolina, because when you think about it, she's dealing with the roads issue and the gas tax, and I'm wondering what's next for her.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, a lot of people, not just here in South Carolina, but nationally are asking that. Of course, she gave the rebuttal to the President Obama's State of the Union address, and she's a young politician, an up-and-comer. I sort of think, sometimes she could go to the Senate. Well, we've got Lindsey Graham, who isn't that old, and Tim Scott, who's been in the Senate even less time, and so there's not a logical next step in South Carolina for Haley. So that's where a lot of this vice presidential speculation, and she could certainly be a good vice presidential pick. She doesn't bring necessarily a big state to the table in terms of South Carolina. This is probably going to be a Republican state, no matter who the vice president is, no matter who the president is. But she could, I think, help the Republican Party appeal to a wider range of voters. Republicans, I mean, that was a big lesson from 2012 when Romney lost, was that the Republican Party needed to do better with minority voters, with women. Lindsey Graham, our own senator, says that Republicans are in a demographic death spiral, which is pretty strong words from a Republican. And he says, look, when we look at how this country's changing, if our party doesn't figure out how to reach out beyond white males, we're going to be in real trouble. And so Haley brings a lot of that. I could see her, I've always thought maybe a cabinet appointment. She's done, definitely been kind of one who's set herself apart as being somebody who is really big into bringing businesses and economic development in the state. And so I wondered about maybe a commerce secretary or something like that. But I definitely think she's got many years of public service ahead of her. And she can't, of course, run for governor for a third straight term. I think my understanding is that if she were to take some time off, she could run again. But that's a little, she'd have to sit at least one term out. But she certainly has time to do that. But I think something national makes sense, and maybe she'll run for president in 2020 or something.
And somebody who's not sitting out, but he's a current congressman, is Mark Sanford. And there's talk that he might come back.
That's what I've heard. Yeah, exactly. I think it's very, when you're a governor, you're a manager, you bring people together, but you're still kind of in charge of a unit. Chris Christie talks about that all the time in the debates about how he's running against a bunch of senators and they've never had to balance a budget and make the tough decisions that he's had to make as governor. As a congressman, Mark Sanford's now one of 435 individuals. There's a lot. You show up and vote. You try to get your legislation passed, but once it gets through the House, then it's got to get through the Senate. So I can see the attraction for him. But I read some piece that said, being the first district congressman as a Republican is a very sweet gig because it's pretty safely Republican. You know, you get when you're getting tired of Charleston, you get to go down to beautiful places like Beaufort and other coastal areas and pull, you know, ask for people's votes. So it's a pretty good gig. But I'm curious to see how long he ends up doing that.
And will Jenny Horn actually take over his seat?
So Jenny Horn is challenged him, and that's pretty unprecedented. Usually, you don't see somebody in your own party challenge an incumbent. Of course, she got a lot of national, certainly statewide and national attention during the debate about the Confederate flag. She had that late night address that was captured and went viral, and everybody played it on all the news shows and YouTube and things like that. And so I think she presents an interesting challenge for Sanford. Obviously, he's going to have, I would expect, a big financial advantage. He has a huge name recognition advantage. But, she's, I wouldn't expect that for a Democrat necessarily to run and beat Sanford in the general. But if he were to lose, I think somebody, like a Jenny Horn, who's made her name in the state, but also could go and maybe give him a little bit of a challenge. And so, we'll see how that goes. And but that could be potentially some interesting dynamics here in the first district over the spring and summer.
Wow. Well, College of Charleston Professor Gibbs Knotts, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming by, sir.
Thank you.
Anytime.